3, 2, 1. Can women perform traditionally male jobs in industry? Many say yes, but there are some problems, and we'll talk about those next right here on To the Point.
To the Point. Presented by Rice University.
Welcome to our program. My name is Scott Hochberg. With us today is Dr. Elizabeth Long, who is an assistant professor of sociology here at Rice University and has been doing research into, amongst other things, the performance of women in traditionally male roles, particularly in the industrial workplace. She's a first-time guest to our program. Welcome to our show. It's good to have you here.
Thanks a lot. It's fun to be able to talk about this work.
Let's talk about just what your work is. Now, first of all, the sort of jobs you were looking at would be traditionally considered heavy physical labor, traditionally male jobs. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. I got into this because Dr. Ken Lockery, who is an industrial psychologist here, wanted to put together a conference on women in physically demanding jobs and the role of physical testing for those jobs. I don't set up physical tests. I'm not terribly concerned with those. I'm a sociologist, and I sort of made the point during early discussions that jobs are more than just a physical task that is performed. Every job has a social context, and it was my question whether that social context might influence women's performance on the job, perhaps as much as, perhaps more than, their physical capabilities of performing heavy or dangerous or difficult work.
Okay, before we get too far into that and get ahead of ourselves, what sorts of jobs are we talking about? For example, you were out at Dow and you were at Exxon, I believe. What types of job descriptions or job positions were you looking at?
People working in mostly oil or chemical related jobs.
Whether typically?
Refinery workers,
okay.
For example, or people doing the mechanical kinds of jobs like welding that are associated with putting together refineries and making them function. Construction work, that kind of thing.
How pervasive are women in these jobs these days?
Well, over the past 10 years, because of EEOC legislation, women have begun to penetrate that part of the workforce. At first, up until about 10, 15 years ago, there were basically no women on those jobs. They were masculine worlds, almost entirely. Now it's up to 8-10% in various parts of that labor force.
Is it still sort of a tokenism sort of thing? Is it still being done to conform to EEOC requirements, or do you feel that women who apply have a reasonably equal chance of getting those jobs?
It is. I think the impulse was EEOC, and yet there are a lot of people in those in administration who are relatively progressive people and would like to see heavy industry follow the tendencies in, say, the white-collar workforce, where women are doing various jobs now that weren't traditionally female.
So the women who are out on these jobs, basically you're finding that from a physical standpoint, they don't really have significant problems?
Well, no, that is not really true, especially when the jobs are really tough physical jobs. For example, at Dow, which is not a terribly automated plant, women are responsible for a significantly larger proportion of injuries. They're absent a good deal more because of those injuries. They're responsible for OSHA, occupational health and safety regulation, accidents, and that kind of thing. So when the work is extremely heavy, they can't perform as well as most men. Now, you have to realize that...
Is this a result of sheer physical strength, or have you found perhaps, and I don't want to dwell on this too long because I know you want to get into a different area, but do you have a feeling that it may be a function of not having sufficient experience at doing that sort of thing, or not having sufficient training, or needing more help in order to learn how to lift things correctly and do that sort of
There's a lot of that. The women who tend to be, you can't discount sheer physical strength for some of these jobs.
Right.
A lot of men can't do some of these jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the strength curves for the male and female population, men are just significantly stronger in upper body strength and so on. But in a lot of the jobs, the women who are most successful are not only strong, but have had experience with traditionally male roles in one sense or another. So that they're successful in part because, they grew up in a family where their father took them around and showed them how to fix cars, and or took them out hunting and fishing. They're used to getting dirty. They're used to sweating. That doesn't seem a violation of femininity for them. So in fact, gender role training plays a really big part in accustoming yourself to a job if you're a woman, a job that involves dirt, sweat, heat.
And typically hard physical labor.
Typically hard physical labor, yeah. Those jobs, a lot of the women who don't do very well at those jobs just find it a really difficult thing to live with, to always have their hands filthy, for example, or to end up at the end of the day being sweaty, because women aren't supposed to be like that. Women are supposed to be.
Well, I think an awful lot of men who opt for office jobs do so for a similar reason.
That leads into another problem, actually. A lot of these jobs are such that only younger men can do them very well. And a real dilemma on industrial sites is what happens to somebody who's passing his physical peak. Now, usually in those settings, older male workers are given slightly easier tasks. But that's seen as something that you've earned by virtue of your seniority. I mean, you've put in all those years.
Right.
In a sense, you deserve an easier task. One of the things that the men workers resent a great deal on the part of the women is that women often get those easier tasks, either because they can't do the really hard work or because it's perceived that they can't do the really hard work. And so, in a sense, these new workers who, in the usual code of things, don't deserve to have it easy, are put into less demanding jobs.
Let's move from the strict physical aspect into some of the things that you find more interesting and possibly more significant, the sociological factors that may prevent a woman from doing as good a job, and those are new to me. I hadn't heard about them until we talked this morning before the show. What are some of the things that you feel really influence how well a woman can perform her job?
Well, one of the things, and it's interesting, it's not just you who hasn't heard about this. Most people hear about women in the white-collar and professional sectors of the workforce. That's where most of the research has been done. What's fascinating to me is that the experiences that you hear about when talking to women workers in blue-collar jobs are relatively similar to those experiences of professional women moving into a predominantly male environment, such as difficulty of getting good instruction. One of the problems that Rosabeth Cantor, who's a sociologist who's looked at professional white-collar work, mentions for token women is the difficulty of finding a mentor, somebody who will show you the ropes of the job, help you make the contacts that are necessary, teach you how to do the work. It's real hard for women to learn from men how to do the work for several reasons. One is a lot of men just don't want to teach them because they don't want them there to begin with.
Right.
Another is that if you ask somebody for help and you're a female, that puts you into a kind of dependency relationship with the man that you're asking for help from. Therefore, he can ask you in return for sexual favors. And that kind of leads into the difficult topic of sexual harassment. So a lot of women, when faced with that, refuse to ask for help. They figure it out on their own. But that's really hard. One woman talked about how difficult it is to spend 8 hours a day in an enclosed truck van driving around the plant with one man. I mean, that's a tense situation just because he's a man and she's a woman. And she talked also about going out when she had her first assignment out in the field, going out and discovering, she called in. There was a slightly difficult situation. Called in to ask what to do, and 6 trucks arrived from all over the yard. Everybody was there to help her, and she said, "No thanks. This is my job. I have to learn how to do it on my own."
Right. So there's additional pressures.
If you're a woman.
Are those similar to, say, the problems that blacks had breaking into the workplace and
That's
problems
right.
of any minority?
Stereotypes of one kind or another. Women are stereotyped as helpless, and they're seen as just not knowing how to do the work, not being capable of getting it together. All of the women I talked to mentioned the fact that women themselves sometimes feed into those stereotypes. Like, for example, these were women who, at the Exxon refinery, who'd done very well in their jobs, but they mentioned that one of the things they had to do was walk a very narrow line between being feminine and being workmanlike. For example, it doesn't do to wear extremely feminine clothes on that job. And if women come out onto the job wearing semi-transparent blouses, they're going to reinforce the stereotype about women.
The stereotype about blue-collar workers is, and you particularly talk about construction workers or something like that, would lend one to think perhaps that those sorts of prejudices and those sort of problems would be even greater in a blue-collar environment than they would be in an office environment. Have you found any of that to be true?
Well, they mention themselves that's changing, the women workers. They say that usually it's the older guys that they have more problems with. Guys who don't expect women to have to work. Younger guys who, all of us are living in a day and age when women are working more than ever before, when there's more divorce and therefore you find single mothers having to support kids. Those guys seem to be more open to women coming into those jobs. Like everybody else, blue-collar workers are changing with the times. And a lot of people, whether personnel people or women workers themselves, are sort of hoping that those changes will continue, although it's probably going to take a while.
If you were to be hired by Exxon or Dow in a position titled something like Vice President in charge of making sure that women can be integrated into these programs, what sorts of things would you do? What would you try to recommend and set up?
Well, a lot of this stuff has been done or is starting to be done. One thing I would do is interview the women and give them a really clear sense about what kind of things are going to happen on the job. For example, it's important that everybody who goes into that kind of work know that it's dirty and physically rough and that you're going to be outside in really hot, muggy weather. I mean, we're talking about Houston, so presumably it would be cold and horrible in other parts of the world. But and a lot of men and women say no when they discover that that's the case. Exxon in particular does that kind of preliminary briefing on what the job is going to be like. Then too, the Exxon people, for example, have started having as part of the intake process discussions in which these sorts of things are brought up. Right.
So it's really more of a matter of awareness, both on the part of the female workers and on the part of the male workers, I guess, too.
That certainly is important. Yeah.
Do you feel companies in general are really making a sincere effort to get women into these sorts of jobs, or are they just sort of saying, here's the job, if you can do it, fine, if not, leave us alone?
That varies obviously a lot from company to company. I'm not sure you could make a broad range statement about where American industry is on these questions. One of the problems is that within hierarchical institutions, as are most of our large corporations, there's often difference in attitude on the part of high administrators and the supervisors, foremen that are right on the line.
People up at the top might say yes, but it's a different thing in
harder
reality.
Down there.
Dr. Elizabeth Long, Assistant Professor of Sociology, has been our guest. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for joining us on the program. I'm Scott Hochberg. See you again next week.
To the Point is produced by Information Services in the Language Lab at Rice University.